Hello everyone and welcome back to the World Fischer Random Championship. It's Magnus Carlsen versus Fabiano Caruana. We are back in the semifinals and the four classical games are over. Magnus won 2 games, Fabi won 1 game, and one of the games were drawn. Now this is the first game of the rapid section. Rapid section is 15 minutes each, but there is an increment, so there is a 2-second increment starting from move 1. That being said, let's check out the game. Magnus with the white pieces opens with c4. And no, it is not the English opening since, it's a World Fischer Random Championship. We have g6 by Fabi, and now e3, preparing to grab the center with d4. We have b6, opening up the light square bishop as well. As you can see now, Fabi using some hypermodern opening techniques with queen to e2 and knight to d6 now by Fabi. d4, Magnus grabs the center, and queen to h6 now. I don't think the principle of bringing your queen out too early goes for Fischer Random, but the theory is still to be created. We have castles by Carlsen, castles by Fabi as well, and knight to c3 now. We have e6 and now b3, opening up the dark square bishop as well. We have knight to c6 and now d5, grabbing more space in the center, forcing Fabi to take action. We have e captures on d5, c captures on d5, and knight to e7. g3, opening up the light square bishop, and now rook d to e8, as the e file is now semi-open, so after the knight moves, it will be a very nice file for the rook. We have queen to d3, and now a5. We have knight 1 to e2, and bishop to b7, so now the knight here guards the bishop as well, and if needed, you could switch the rook over to a8 if you need to push a4 or use ideas like that. Bishop to b2, and now comes f5 by Fabi. Bishop back to a3 now. It's a very nice diagonal for the bishop, and bishop to e5. If bishop captures on d6, then you can recapture with the bishop. You don't have to ruin your pawn structure, but here is where Magnus gets the idea. First, knight to d4, an excellent outpost for the knight. If you want to get rid of it, you will either have to give up your bishop pair, or think of some other ideas how to get rid of it. So queen to g7 first, and now f4. It's a change in the position, change in the pawn structure, but Magnus does it with the idea that he wants to capture here. So bishop back to f6, and now bishop captures on d6. We have c captures on d6, and now with the d pawns doubled up like this, this light square bishop will not become very useful. We have rook f to e1 with ideas of pushing e4 at some point, and now rook to c8. The c file is now open, so you want to put your rooks there. Knight c to b5, going after the d6 pawn, and now bishop to a6, pinning the knight as the queen is still on d3. Queen back to b1, and now comes bishop captures on d4. You have to start trading, otherwise you're going to lose the d6 pawn. So bishop captures on d4, we have knight captures on d4, and now rook to c5, going after white's d5 pawn. Magnus plays b4, the rook is under attack, so a captures on b4, queen captures on b4, and now bishop to c4, again with a double attack, a triple attack now towards the d5 pawn. Magnus captures on b6, and now comes queen to f6. He doesn't want to give up the d6 pawn. You could play knight captures here, then you lose this pawn. So first queen to f6, and now queen to b7. Attacking the d7 pawn, and here Magnus says, okay, if you want, you can grab my a2 pawn. I'm gonna grab this pawn, attack, threaten knight to e6. So what will you play here? It's very hard to find a move that prevents such ideas. For example, you have to get rid of the d5 pawn at some point. If you do it now, knight to e6 will fork both the rooks. So it's not easy to find a move that helps you with that. You could move the rook a5, but still knight to e6 is a very ugly move to face. So here Fabi doesn't like bishop captures followed by queen captures on d7. Instead, he plays rook to d8. He defends the d7 pawn, but now Magnus just gets to push his past a4 pawn. So a4, We have king to g7, getting the king away from the back rank, and now a5. You have a passed pawn, so of course you want to push it. We have knight captures on d5, finally, and now Magnus just continues pushing at a6. And it's important to know that Carlsen's bishop on h1, although so far pretty dormant, controls the queening square, so this will be very important, or maybe it won't. We have knight to c7, now with a double attack on the a6 pawn, also guarding the a8 square now twice. And here Carlsen could continue with a7. It's definitely a move, getting the pawn out of harm's way, but here, as both of them are very low on the clock, at some point Fabi was... had 2 more minutes on the clock than Magnus. It was something like 4.5 minutes Fabi, 2.5 minutes Magnus. But around here, the situation on the clock pretty much equalized, and Magnus played knight to c6. And here, well, it's just a very unpleasant move to face. So what can you do here? Obviously, you can capture the knight with the d captures on c6. There's also the possibility of rook captures on c6. Rook captures on c6 seems to be a sturdier defense. For example, rook captures on c6, bishop captures on c6, and now you play knight captures on a6, with the idea that if queen captures, then you can capture. The pawn is no longer pinned. And if you don't, if you go back bishop to g2, then you go knight to c5, attack the queen, and so on, and continue defending. But Fabi decided to play d captures on c6. Now he allows queen captures on c7 with check, king to h6, and now a7. So next move, Magnus will capture on c6, again grab hold of the queening square and push a8 to queen his pawn. Rook a8, of course not allowing this, and now queen to b7, going after the rook on a8. We have queen to f8, Fabi defends the rook, and now bishop captures on c6. Here just threatening queen captures on a8, which would win a rook. So Fabi has to do something. He decides to give up the exchange while also grabbing the a7 pawn. So rook captures on a7, and it's definitely the best he could hope for from a position like this, as both of them are very, very low on the clock. I believe at this point they are both playing on increment. They have like 5 seconds each. So queen captures on a7, rook captures on c6, and here queen to d4 by Magnus, a nice centralizing move with the queen. He wants to play rook to a1, bring the rook over to a7, and try to push his advantage to a full point. We have d5 by Fabi, now defending the bishop. The rook can now move, and also is just a very solid setup in the center. Rook a1 by Magnus, and now rook to c7, blocking the a7 square. Carlsen still plays it. You don't have they are, like I said, they're both playing on increment. And here queen to b4 by Fabi. So what do you play here? You cannot capture on c7, otherwise you're getting queen captures on e1. So here we have rook e to a1, just bringing it back, doubling up on the a file. We have rook captures on a7, queen captures on a7 now, not allowing rook captures on a7, and then queen to e1 check. So queen captures on a7, and now queen to d2, going after the e3 pawn. Here Magnus played queen to e7, now with ideas of queen to g5 check, followed by rook to a7, probably should lead to checkmate, but Fabi finds a brilliant defensive resource. Feel free to pause the video here and try to find this brilliant defensive resource Fabi found with few seconds on the clock. Well, I give you a couple of seconds. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding such a brilliant defensive resource. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, here Fabi played d4. And now the idea becomes, well, apparent. The idea is that after queen g5 check or queen to h4 check, once the king retreats, and rook to a7 check happens, the bishop is now able to block check with bishop to f7, and this is what saves Fabi in this situation. So Carlsen saw this. He played queen to h4 check, king g7, queen to e7 check, king to h6, and now queen to g5 with check. King to g7, and it was in this position that the players agreed to a draw. Magnus is winning in this position, but he had to claim a draw because he was down to 2 seconds on the clock. He was in the moment and couldn't really calm down to continue the game with only 2 seconds on the clock. So you don't gain anything by playing rook to a7 check. If the rook comes to a7, like I said, you can just block with the bishop, and there is no good way to continue. You cannot capture, otherwise queen captures will pick up the rook because it's check. The king is on g1. If you push e4, Then you get h6, you push the queen back, queen to d8, and then you get a nice perpetual queen e1 check. Here you can just do this for as long as you want. So the way not to go for a perpetual here is after queen to e7 check, king to h6, you have to push g4 because you're still up the exchange. So it doesn't matter if black doesn't have any checks. The only check black can do is queen captures on e3 with check. And then after queen captures, pawn captures, now you go after the pawn with attacking the bishop. For example, rook a4, bishop b5, you're going to attack the bishop. Once the bishop moves back, you're going to attack it once again. And now after the bishop moves, first capture here, and then hopefully recapture this one. Black will probably play something like this. You will block the queening square, and then after this g captures on f5, you have this 3 against 2, but it's a rook against the bishop. You should win this. However, with so little time on the clock, not so much. So after king to g7, they agree to a draw, and an excellent game by both of them. Really, that a-pawn just marched up the board, but Fabi, with seconds on the clock, finds the brilliant defensive resource that is d4, and finds this beautiful bishop retreat with bishop to f7. The first game of the Rapids ends in a draw. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Georgiana Branze, Nedal Mohamed, Matthias Massman, Carl Nielsen, and Alexander Kovalenko for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this very nice event, continuing the coverage of the European Team Championship, and of course checking up on your wonderful suggestions. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day and the evening.